So this is going to be a quick demo of how to actually unwrap an object and create a UV template. It's not an official video, it's just something that I'm throwing together real quick for some students, and I'm not monetizing it or anything, so because it's not going to be up to the usual quality standards. There's a lot of stuff going on and there'll be a lot of starts and stops. I'm not going to bother editing it. I'm just doing this to illustrate how you should approach unwrapping and creating a UV template, because there seems to be a lot of confusion with it. Excuse me. And it's not as hard as everybody makes it out to be. So I specifically picked a low poly object from an old model, and it's all quads, I believe. There's a few tries in here. So it's not perfect, and it has a weird shape to it. That's usually something that freaks people out. So I'm going to show you how I would go about unwrapping this and actually creating a UV template that would be usable. So here we go. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a material. So I'm going to hit M on my keyboard and come in here to my slate material editor. If you're not using the slate material editor, if you're still over here in the compact material editor, you need to get with the times and come up here to modes and go to slate material editor. You can create a standard material just by dragging and dropping into this area right here. And what we're going to use is just a simple procedural checker map. So I'm going to drag that in here, connect that to my diffuse channel, and I'm going to assign that to my object. Now it's not going to show up right away, as you can see. I'm going to select my material by double clicking it, and you can see that I'll get the little dotted line around it. I'm going to right click this guy and say show shaded material in viewport. Now I'm actually going to be able to see that on the model itself, and you can see that the UVs are a mess. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the map itself, double click it to gain access to its parameters, and over here under tiling I'm going to turn this up to 10 so that we have a better visual to work with here. And you can see that there's a lot of stretching here, and what we want is we want a 1:1 aspect ratio for the black and white squares themselves. So once that's applied, we're going to go ahead and close the material editor. And I'm going to apply an unwrap UVW modifier to this guy. And you can see right here that I actually have it stored as a button right above my modifier stack. If you're not real familiar with Macs, you might not know that you can actually customize this area. There's a button right here that says configure modifier sets. If you come in here to the configure modifier sets area, you can set the number of buttons that you have, and you can scroll down through your modifiers, and you can actually double click them and they will assign to those buttons. So what I'm going to do is come over here and apply that unwrap UVW. If you're doing it the old-fashioned way, you can scroll down here. It's towards the bottom right there, unwrap UVW. And you can see that all of these green seams show up right off the bat. Those are map seams, and the deal is that Max is endlessly confused about exactly what we're trying to do with the material here. So we have to essentially come in here and explain to it how we want our material to be applied to the object. So I'm going to come over here for now and just turn off my map seams. I don't need to see them for now because I know they're all messed up. And I'm going to start with the geometric areas here, this square shape right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my UV editor, and I'm just going to dock it over here on this side. And you can see that the UVs are overlapping and everything's just a mess in here. The other thing I'm going to do, just to make it easier to look at what I'm doing, is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to turn off the active map in the dialog. And once that's done, I'm looking at just the wireframe of the UVs. And I'm not going to be able to select them in here, but under Unwrap UVW, you can see I have vertex, edge, and polygon subobjects. I'm going to come in here to subobject polygon, and I'm going to very carefully select. And there's a couple of ways I could do it. I could come in and just do a series of planar maps. I'm going to show you a shortcut, and please don't become over-reliant on it, because people will use this and think that they're done unwrapping. You're not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to turn off ignore backfacing. I'm going to drag a marquee selection around all of the polygons in the scene. You can see the entire thing is selected. The other way to go about doing that is to come over here into the UVW editor itself and select them. So either way, but if you're going to do it out here in the viewport, make sure you turn off ignore backfacing. Once those are all selected, inside of my edit UVWs window, I'm going to come up here to the mapping dropdown and I'm going to hit flatten mapping. Let's see. And I want to make sure that my polygon angle is at least at 45 degrees. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a separate UV island out of any polygons that are at a greater than 45 degree angle to each other. The spacing between the poly islands is set here under spacing. Right now it's at 0.02 by default. We can leave it there. Normalize clusters just means that it's going to set everything inside of this one-to-one space. Rotate clusters is just that. If you turn it off, it will not rotate the clusters. We're not too worried about that at this point. Same thing with filling in holes, which I'll explain a little bit later. And we're not doing this by material IDs, so we can just come in here and hit OK. What it's going to do is it's going to break everything down, and it looks like it did a reasonably solid job. And what helps with this is the fact that a lot of this is quad-based. Like I said, there are a few tries, but 3ds Max is definitely going to have an easier time finding its way around the geometry if it's all quad-based. So once we have this basic setup, what we can do is we can come in here and set about attaching everything. Now, because we have all these separate UV islands, what we're going to do is we're going to come down here for now and turn on Select by Element UV Toggle. And essentially what that does is whenever I click on one part of a UV island, it's going to select the entirety of that island. And you can see that what it did here was it applied a planar UV to this section, so it caught part of the side of this cylinder right here, which we're going to have to get rid of. Now, everything's going to end up in this one-to-one space when we're done, but what I'm going to do for now is, as I'm working on these things, as I need to isolate them, I'm going to bring them over here outside of the one-to-one space to work on. Now, this little guy right here, I want to rotate 90 degrees. There's actually a shortcut button for that under Quick Transform, which is rotate -90 around pivot. There we go. And now that I've got this little guy out here, let's come in and find the side, which would be this piece right here. And I can presume from its shape that this is the other side right here. And let's also find the top. And you can see that this comes together very, very quickly. Once you know what you're doing with UVs, it's not that difficult of a job. Alright, so got those parts right there, and like I said, it's a very odd shape, so we're going to have to use a couple of different techniques to get it all unwrapped. Let's see. Make sure that we're still recording. Yes. Okay. So what I need to know is which side of this piece actually connects to this piece. Now, I can do that by clicking down here and seeing that these edges turn blue. The other thing I could do is I could come in here to Subobject Vertex, and you can select that here, here, or down here. It gives you lots of different options for that. And I can come up here under the Display options, and I can tell it I want it to show me vertex connections. Once Show Vertex Connections is on, it becomes essentially a connect the dots. And you can see that the number of this vertex corresponds to the number of this vertex. So what I can do is grab this guy, rotate him -90 degrees around its pivot, and then I can pull this entire thing down here. And it's not going to snap right away. What I have to do is come down here and turn on Grid Snap. And by doing that, it should also snap my vertices by default. So if I click and drag on one vertex, it'll snap those two vertices together just like a couple of Lego bricks. And then I can select, well, before I do that, I have to turn off Select by Element. I just want to grab these vertices right here. And what you have to understand about this is that there are actually two vertices here from two separate UV islands. They're just coincident, which means they occupy the same 2D space, but they're not welded. So if I were to come in here and click on this guy as an element again, you can see that they are not in fact welded yet. So what we want to do is turn off Select by Element, grab that green seam line, and then over here under our options, we want to come in and say Weld Selected Subobject. So there's no longer a green line there, which means there's no longer a seam. If I were to come out here and turn Map Seams on again, you can see that there's no longer a map seam there, and the checkerboard runs smoothly across that 45, well actually that's a 90-degree angle. Alright, so the other thing that I want to do is I want to separate the cylinder from this, because we're going to treat this as a separate part of the unwrap. So what I'm going to do is come over here to Subobject Polygon, and Select by Element is off, and I'm going to come down here and grab these guys right here. And just to show that you can work in both spaces, I'm going to hold down Control and select these guys out here. To detach them, all I have to do is come in here and hit Break. And what it does, you'll see that there's a green UV seam that appears there now. Those guys are now their own UV island. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this for now. I'm going to break this up into a couple of different videos just so I don't run out of RAM. I'll probably just edit it into one giant video when you see it. So, like I said, not super official. You can hear my cat meowing in the background. So, but like I said, not monetizing this one, so this one's free for nothing. You don't even have to watch an ad. So we'll pick this up in the next section. Okay, welcome back. This is part 2. We're going to go in here and continue unwrapping this low poly. I think this originally was I think it's an engine that was part of a larger machine that drives a conveyor belt. Doesn't matter, I just needed a complex shape. Alright, so the last thing that we did was break off these parts of the cylinder. We were working just on this boxy area up here. So I'm going to take these guys right over here, and you can see that they're actually at an angle, so whenever the planar map was applied to it, it really didn't quite catch it. It's got a little bit of weirdness to it. So there's a couple ways you can deal with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here to Subobject Vertex. I'm going to select everything that's in this line right here. And I'll use this as an opportunity to show you the Align Horizontal button here. So if I click on that, it's going to align all those guys horizontally, just like it said. Then I can come in and do the same vertically with these guys. Now, it is going to mess up the aspect ratio a little bit, but there's a way that we can fix that too. There we go. And the nice thing about seeing this in a video is a lot of people suffer from beginner quits whenever they're learning to unwrap, because it is a very nuanced process and there's lots of little tricks and secrets that, quite frankly, you normally don't pick up for a couple of years. And you look back to stuff you did originally and you think it's horrible. But again, it's a nice thing about the modern age and YouTube and things of that nature. You can see all of this stuff and pick it up very quickly. So hopefully I'm going to save everybody a few months or years of trial and error with this. So I've got everything here. I want to fix my aspect ratio. I'm going to come up here to Tools and down to Relax. And what the Relax is going to do is it's going to compare the position of the UVs here in 2D space with the position of the vertices in 3D space. And there's a mathematical algorithm that it applies that's going to average these two out. So it's going to try to reconcile both. And the result is that we get less distortion in the finalized UVs. So I'm going to come up here and I need to set a couple of options, and I also need to be in Subobject Polygon mode for this. Where it says relax by edge angles, I'm actually going to use polygon angles, and I'm going to turn my amount up to 1. And this is something that essentially you start and stop. You aren't going to see much difference here, so I'm going to be able to just hit start. You see it shifted a little bit. And actually, yeah, I actually don't need to stop it. So yeah, it just shifted it a little bit to adjust for those little changes, those alignments that I did. And it might have put me right back to where I was, meaning that, yeah, it pretty much did, that I'm not going to get that perfect horizontal line. And that's okay. At least now you know where the relax tool is. We'll come back to that later. So I'm going to come in here, select these guys again, and you see how everything's turning blue on this side. I could also come in here, select the verts, and you can see that it'll show me the numbers as well. So I'm going to come back in here to polygons. I'm going to rotate this guy 90 degrees clockwise. And let's try to do that same trick, but I know for a fact we're going to run into an issue with welding if I don't come in here and line these guys up vertically. We don't have to worry as much about these guys for now, but I did want to have those guys lined up. So I'll come back in here, make sure that snap to grid is still turned on, and I can come in here and grab from this vertex. And it's not going to snap while I'm not in vertex mode. I don't know what I was thinking there. Like I said, not a lot of polish on this one. Alright, so I'll drag this over. And sometimes with the snapping turned on, it'll freak out. This scares people. Just stay focused on the vertex that you're going towards. As long as I make sure that I'm clicking on vertex 34 here, if it starts going in, remember, it's snapping to a grid that you can't even see here because we don't have the grid turned on. But it's also going to snap to those vertices. So just kind of calmly move over to the vertex you want to connect it to. Like I said, it's very connect the dots. Then I just want to come in, select all of those overlapping vertices where we have this green seam right here. And I'm just going to tell it that I want to weld that selected subobject. There we go. And then same thing on this side. So we'll take this guy, rotate him -90. We're going to stay in subobject vertex mode. We're going to drag 47 to 47. And you can see that the rotation of the UVs, it's a lot more off on this side. So before I actually do that weld, I'm just going to align these guys vertically. And then make sure to come in and actually select the entire thing again. Then come in, just select those guys and weld. So now that's all one piece. If I come over here and I hit F4, you can see that we no longer have a UV seam there. And everything sort of comes in and closes in around itself very neatly, which is what you're after with UVs. You don't want to have anything overlapping. Well, there are reasons to overlap UVs if you're working with limited texture space for something for, say, a mobile or a handheld game. Then the need might arise. But in most cases, especially early on before you've done your normal map projection and stuff, you don't want to have any overlapping UVs. All right. So what I could try doing in here now is I could try coming in, now that this is all one UV island, selecting the entire thing, coming back up to Tools, Relax. And it's a little annoying, but you have to reset polygon angles and your amount every time that you close this. And you don't actually have to close it. You can just leave the thing open, and it won't lose your settings. But I'm going to go ahead and hit Start Relax. And see how it straightened those out a little bit? And again, it's super subtle on something like this. If you want to see a more dramatic demonstration of this, go and check out my unwrapping, I think it's UVW unwrapping a human head. Check out that tutorial to see how you would use these techniques for organic objects and shapes. Okay, so we've got that part, and I'm actually pretty darn happy with that. So we're just going to leave that piece be. And like I said, what I do is I tend to park it somewhere outside of my one-to-one space. And then let's very quickly come in and focus on these cylinders. Now, this piece over here, if I hit F4 again, and we're seeing this side, I made a point of coming in. The original model wasn't all quads. So I made a point of coming in here and making this all quads. I'm going to turn on Ignore Backfacing again, just because I don't want it to come in and grab anything on the other side. Okay, and you can see that I actually have this as a UV island down here. I'm going to turn off Select by Element. I'm going to grab this one little straggler right here, this little guy. And I'm going to break him off of here. And then that way I can come back in, select this entire element, move it off over here. And you can see that this little guy right here is associated with this. You can see where it actually connects to this. We're not actually going to connect these two because it's across a 90-degree angle, so it doesn't matter if we have a perfect checkerboard across that corner. If I wanted to be really OCD about it, I could come in here and grab this guy and rotate him a couple of degrees, maybe 5 degrees. Now I have angle snap turned on, so if I turn angle snap off and I come back in here and whoops, dock this guy again, specifically over here to the side. I can rotate it in much smaller increments to get it evened out a little bit more. Doesn't really matter. Like I said, just me obsessing on details. So I'm going to come in now and grab this guy on this side. So we'll come back in here. And here's that fella right here. First thing we've got to do is get rid of that little triangular bit right there. So we'll break that off. Come back and select this and move it over here. We're just going to treat it like it's one big cylinder, essentially. So down under here, let's grab all the rest of these. And I could do it inside of the UV space as well. Oops, hold down Alt to deselect that guy. And the thing that a lot of people get caught up with when they're first starting to UV is they worry about whether or not what they're doing is correct. Am I doing this correct? Do I have the right thing selected? It isn't so much a matter of being correct right off the bat. There's plenty of trial and error and do-overs that you'll run into with this. I'm just trying to grab that, everything that I think is associated with that cylinder, and you can see that these two pieces right here are actually connected to the bottom of my box here. So I think I'm going to hold down Alt, and I'm just going to leave those guys where they are. And that's one of those things I might change my mind on that later because I want to have this as part of the overall cylinder. We'll see. So with all of those guys selected, what we need to do, and you can see they're spread out everywhere and they're connected in different places. I'm actually going to come in here and apply a cylindrical map over here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that with a cylindrical map, and you can see that the cylindrical map is kind of going crazy here. So what we want to do is we want to fit it to that object, and you can see that even when it's, or that selection, even when it's fitted, it's not, the cylinder's not going in the right direction. So we can come in here and tell it, we can try X. X though isn't correct. Y. Y looks like it's correct. Okay, so we get something that's a little bit more well laid out. Now, common mistake. People will turn on the cylindrical UV projection, then they'll leave it on, and they'll come over here and they'll try to move this, and they'll wonder why they can't move it. If you're ever in your UV map channels, or in your UV map editor, and you cannot move your selected polygons, vertices, edges, whatever, you've got to come over here and turn off projection. Okay? Always double check these before you do anything else. So same deal. Going to move these over here. And you can see that everything is very, the squares are very compressed, right? So what we need to do is we need to see if we can correct that somehow. Now we could try relaxing it, but because it has a weird shape, you see what's going to happen? This part looks fine, but it's going to pull those little legs, and those are going to get kind of confused. So, and I don't have a plan for this. This is just kind of me messing around. There we go. So another thing that I could try is I could select all these guys, come up here to my scale modifier, and select scale horizontally. See, and I can mess around with that. Now, if I compress these, if I bring them in toward one another, you can see that I'm starting to get more of a one-to-one there. See? But I could also play around with the same thing vertically. And see what that gets me. And generally what I do is I take it to an extreme so I can see like, okay, that's definitely wrong. That's definitely wrong. We just want to come in here and get as close to square as we possibly can. And if it's not 110% accurate, that's not really that big of a deal. There we go. That's pretty good. All right. So those are flowing okay. And like I said, we're not going to connect these guys to this guy. But what we are going to do is we're going to make all 4 of these guys the exact same size so that the checkerboard is the exact same size everywhere on the model. You'll hear that referred to as, you'll hear artists talk about texel density on the surface. They're referring to the resolution of the map, and the way that you can ensure that all of your pieces are getting the same number of pixels from whatever bitmap you're applying to it. Select these guys, and there's a little button here under Arrange Elements called Rescale Elements. What it does is it doesn't mess with your aspect ratio, but it scales all of these guys so that they are at the same texel density, at the same resolution. Okay? And remember, if there's ever a term that you hear me use or anybody use, and you don't understand it, type it into Google. It's all the answers are out there. But you know that because you're watching tutorials on YouTube, so you know that if you want knowledge of some sort of a process, no matter how technical it is, it's out there somewhere. Somebody's made a video of it. And if they haven't, quite frankly, then that's a business opportunity for you if you can learn how to do it. You can put it on YouTube and monetize it and make a couple pennies here and there. All right. So that whole front piece is, it's pretty well along at this point, okay? And again, just so I don't run out of RAM here, I'm going to go ahead and break this up into 3 pieces, and we'll finish up the back part of this. Okay, here we go with part 3. So we're going to take this back piece right here, and we're going to focus on UVing it. You can see, and I just now noticed this, there's a little bit of weirdness in the angle of some of the polys back here. And I don't know if that's I don't know if that's a mistake that I made or if that's part of the original design. I haven't looked at the blueprint for it in years. But that's something that we're going to have to deal with a little bit. It's not even really causing any kind of distortion here, but that just jumped out at me. I thought, it's kind of unusual. So I'm going to grab this bit back here, and it's already got a planar map applied to it. I could try doing it again. I'd have to mess around to get it aligned to the right axis. In this case, that's axis X. And then make sure you turn that off before you move that off somewhere out here. There we go. And we want to make all these guys the same size, so I can grab all these, rescale elements again. And you can see that it's going to be a little silly. It's going to overlap them, which is a bit annoying, but it's not the end of the world. Let me turn off my grid snap for a minute here. There we go. All right, so we've got all those pieces. Couple other tools that I want to show you here that we might not end up using in this video, so I want to make sure that I make a point of explaining them. If I come in here with select by element on, let's see which guy. Yeah, let's go with this guy right here. All right, so I've got this little guy right here, and I want to connect him to this little guy right here. Okay, and we can see that with the blue lines, it's showing that these two guys are related to one another. And I could do the thing that I showed you in the second part where I'm welding the vertices, but there's also another way to do this. It's not going to work real well for this, but I still want you to see it. If I select this guy, and I come up here under the stitch options, and I choose Stitch Custom, see what it does? It goes in and it grabs that other piece that it's sharing an edge with, and it welds them automatically. It doesn't always do a perfect job, but a lot of my students like it because it's really fast, and then they can just come in after the fact and clean up, or they can come in here and grab these 2 verts. And by the way, if you have 2 verts that aren't within your weld threshold, see? Well, those were, but let's pretend they're not. The other thing you can do is you can select one of them and hit this little target weld button, and you can just click and drag that little guy over. You've got a little W there, and weld them that way. See? So there's a couple different ways that you can achieve the same result. And I could keep going with that. I could come into select element, maybe. There we go. And I could do, let's see. So these two parts are turning blue. If I come up here and I do a stitch custom, see, it'll come in and pull all of those guys in at the same time. And I could just kind of keep going with that. But see, eventually it might might start to get weird on you. So if I come in here and I grab this guy instead, and I do a stitch, and it's going to move it to that element, so it's going to jump around on you. So you might have to... Pardon me. Okay, you might have to keep moving this thing around. Yeah, there we go. So it's a way to very quickly come in and put this whole thing together. Except for that last piece, which is going to make it freak out. Because it's going to try to wrap both sides around. See? Or it's going to try to grab the wrong thing. So eventually you'll reach a point where you have to come in and do at least a little bit of this by hand, because this has a seam on both sides. And we have to eventually pick a point where we're going to break this thing up into separate sides. So with this little guy, what I would do is come in. This is the way I would do it. There's probably another smarter, better way to do it. But I would rotate this guy up like this, and then I would grab this guy, rotate him, and remember, you can also rotate. There's a free rotation you can do here. And I have angle snap turned off, so I can just come in here and rotate this guy to whatever I think is appropriate. Move him over here. And then I could actually come in and just target weld some of these guys. Like with these two guys, I could probably, yeah, I could probably do that. These two guys probably outside of the threshold. Now, one of the things you could do is you can come in and turn up the threshold. But then things go crazy. Unless you just have those two vertices selected. I have no idea what I just did right there, but I made it mad. There we go. So we'll go back to point 1. So I'm going to come back into subobject vertex, and I'm just going to target weld these. And if you're thinking, wait, won't that cause all kinds of stretching? Yeah, it will. This is just me showing you some of the tools that I want you to know moving forward. Because I'm sick of people not knowing this stuff, and I run into this situation enough with students that they're excellent. Some of them are really, really excellent modelers, and their UVs are terrible. So I've seen it enough times that I think it's systemic, that there's definitely some sort of message that's not getting across, or they know how to do it, but they hate it, and it's not like doing your taxes. Granted, it's a little bit time consuming, but it's not really that hard. So I can come in here, and let's take a look at the actual model now. And you can see that the UVs are stretched and warped and weird. And we've got a few in here that we don't necessarily want to be part of this selection. So these guys right here. And probably these two guys right here, and this guy. So I'm going to go ahead and break them off as a separate piece, and that part's going to be kind of a pain in the butt. And I want that to be in there. That's why I picked such a weird shape. I don't really like tutorials where everything goes smoothly the first time through, and you can tell that it's been rehearsed a bunch of times. I mean, those are way more professional, and you know, they're nicely presented, but at the same time, that doesn't reflect anybody's experience. When you're modeling something from scratch, you're going to have all kinds of problems. So let's just be real about that and see the backtracking and the hem-hawing and stuff that you have to do when you're making something, especially when you're making it for a video game, because there are so many restrictions. Okay, so I've got these guys selected, and I can either come in here and throw a cylinder map on this, which I might end up doing, or I could try doing it with a relax. So I'll come in here and see what kind of a result relax gets me. Relax is still a little bit wonky, so I'm going to come in here and throw a cylindrical map on it and make sure that it's lined up along that x-axis. And you can see that because this thing is at a weird angle, it's rotated. Normally I would have rotated this thing back, made it horizontal to make my life easier when I'm unwrapping. I actually left it this way on purpose so that I could come in and show you that the gizmo itself can be modified. I can come in here and hit E on my keyboard, and I can rotate this gizmo, see? Until the gizmo is pretty well lined up. In fact, let's close our UV window for a second. And let's look at this guy in, say, a front view. There we go. So let's go back into our cylinder map here. I can actually come in and rotate this guy and try to get the angle so that it's pretty well lined up. And then I can come in and move him as well. Let's pull this guy down a little bit. Because the UVs are very, very malleable. Okay, and it drives me crazy because I see people trying to do this and they're acting like the tools don't exist, or they don't. Oh, I don't want to do anything unpredictable. It's like, why even worry about it? Just get in there and press buttons and see see what happens. There's always an undo, or you can save the thing and go back to an earlier save if you completely screw it up. But get in there and experiment with this. Okay, so these guys are kind of squashed from left to right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here to scale, but instead of scaling along the reference coordinates, I'm going to come in here and go to local. And you'll see that what that gets me, do you see how the z-axis is actually running along the length of the modifier? Because we're looking at the local axis. So when I rotated this thing, I rotated that axis. I rotated the gizmo and the axis was affected. So if I come in here now and I look at this in the UV editor, see what I'm getting? Now there are a couple of spots on here because it's not a perfect cylinder, which is one of the things that I like about this, is it's not perfect. So there are still a couple of little areas where you're going to get distortion. And I want to stress that, because no one told me this when I was starting, sometimes you can't get rid of every single little bit of distortion. So don't worry about it. Get as close as you can, okay? All right, so there's that. I'm going to turn off the UV modifier now. And I'm going to move that outside of here. And you can see that it's not perfect, right? There's a couple little things I could tweak here and there and try to balance out. If I wanted to, I could come in sub-object vertex mode and grab this lower row of verts and align them horizontally. Same thing over here. Now these guys, see how I have these little green seams here? Those guys need to be welded. So I'm going to grab all those and just say weld. Gets rid of that weirdness along the seam. See that? There we go. I'm going to do the same. Well, actually, I didn't line those guys up vertically. Same thing. Same thing. Okay? And again, it's not the right size as everything else, but we'll rescale everything again here. And the last thing we need to tackle is the really strange part, which is all these little guys right here. But just to err on the side of paranoia, I'm going to break this up into a 4th bit, just so that, again, I don't run out of memory or something and lose the last 15 minutes of record time. So I will see you in... Okay, the last part. Let's finish this up. So I have my straggler pieces here, and it's a weird shape. It's not entirely flat. And you could make the argument that I should probably try to connect these pieces to this piece up here. And you might be right about that. It might come to that. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab all these guys as one big blob. And I'm just going to throw a planar map on them. Like that. And you can see right where the stretching is going to happen is where the angle of these faces don't quite line up with that plane. And sometimes you run into that. You don't see it a lot in tutorials because frankly, it's tough to correct for. And it takes a lot of just messing around. But I'm going to go ahead and turn off planar map now so I can actually move the thing. And I'm going to move it outside of my 1-to-1. And first things first, I'm going to come into Tools and into Relax. And we'll try the Relax first. Remember, polygon angles, I turned my amount up to 1. And let's hit Start Relax. There we go. And stop. Let's see what that does for us. Because again, that algorithm is going to look at all of those polygons and try to find the best solution. To be honest, that's not too bad. That works pretty darn well. Okay. Now, you see right in here, there's a little bit of distortion. Maybe we can fix that, maybe we can't. Part of the reason for that is that we've got triangular pieces in here, and we're missing this little connector piece right here because it's part of the cylinder. So yeah, things can get weird. So let's come in here with the, I don't think I'm going to need the Relax tool again, so I'm going to close that out. I'm going to try just moving this horizontally and see what I get. Okay. Now let's try just moving vertically. There, that's a little better. Again, it's not perfect. See, we're still getting a stretch right there. That's another thing. Make sure that you rotate this and look at what you're getting from a bunch of different angles. I might even have to come in and play around with the position of this guy relative to this guy. And like I said before, realize you're probably not going to get it perfect. But also realize that if this is for a game, and again, this isn't, don't use this as an excuse to do bad work. Still always do your best work, your very best work. Because there's always a bunch of people in the lobby that want your job in video games. So you at least want to make sure that you're better than them. But also realize that if this is, if this is one piece of a machine in a first-person shooter, anybody that's spending time scrutinizing this one little piece of your geometry is probably going to get blown away in short order. I know this because it happens to me all the time in games where I stop to look at a texture or I stop to admire the way that the geometry is put together, and I get killed. All right. So yeah. And how much time, people ask, how much time do I spend going vertex by vertex? Depends on your deadline. When does your boss want the finished model from you? Is ultimately what it really comes down to, because we got to make our deadlines. So you try to do the best job you can with the deadlines that you have. And the same thing is true with any aspect of gaming, whether it's programming or the writing, the dialogue, all of it. We're just trying to do the best job we can in the amount of time that we have. I mean, that's why you have patches and DLC and things like that, because there's always time after the fact. All right, so just a little bit, just messing around a little bit there. And then sometimes it helps, and sometimes it completely ruins things. Just be aware of that. But sometimes it helps after you've come in here and manipulated these points to come in here and try to apply a relax again. Let's see. Nah. It pretty much looks as broken as it did before, so I'm going to come in here and undo that, and I'm going to stick with my original solution. Okay. So now we have everything unwrapped. What we're going to do is we're going to make everything the same size, which I just did with a button press. And I guess if you do this without anything selected, it just automatically rescales everything. Huh, even I learned something today. I thought you had to have everything selected. All right, so those guys have all been rescaled, so we're going to get the same texel density over the surface of the entire object. So what we have to do now, and this is a video game thing, we have to arrange everything in this one-to-one space. Now, there's man, there's like a 4-hour lecture associated with why everything has to be inside the one-to-one space, and how sometimes you're only going to use half of the one-to-one space or a quarter of the one-to-one space, depending on how you've broken up your UV resources and your texture resources for the particular project that you're working on. And it varies from game to game. But for this example, since this is just an exercise or a demo, I'm going to assume that, or I'm going to pretend that I have the entire one-to-one space. So let's say that this little guy is going to get a 512 by 512 texture map. So again, there's a way to shortcut this. I can select everything. Maybe I don't even have to select everything. I can just come over here and say pack custom. Yep, and see what it does? It packs everything. It does pretty much the best job that it can, putting everything inside of that one-to-one space as efficiently as possible. And the reason that we do this, you see all this space right here? Okay. Whatever you're playing whatever system you're playing a game on, I don't care if it's a PC, if it's a Mac, if it's an Xbox, a PlayStation, a Wii U, or whatever the current gen titles are when you're watching this. All of these areas in here, even though we're not actually using this part of this texture map, right? These spaces in here, these are still being calculated and counted by the graphics processor, by the processor. You know, it's taking up memory. So this, having all of this empty space, if we have to have a texture, and it has to be a square texture, we want to waste as little of this space as humanly possible. Okay? Because if we don't, if we just leave it like this where we have a bunch of empty space, effectively what we're doing is we're sabotaging the frame rate of our own product. I heard one artist describe it once as you're effectively stealing from the company. So you as an artist have to try to use this space as efficiently as possible. So I'm just going to come in here and again, you can't always use all the space. Know that ahead of time. And that's why, you know, you consult your colleagues and you know, ask them for advice, and, you know, the more experienced artists and stuff, and say, hey, how can I make the best out of this space? So I'm going to come up here and go back to moving along all available axes here. And you can see that if I try to use the space more efficiently here, the problem becomes that I can't now fit all of these guys into the space, and you don't want these to overlap. Especially if you're going to render, if you're going to do a texture projection, meaning if you're going to have a higher poly version of this geometry that you're then going to project onto this geometry and to create a normal map, a cavity map, that type of thing. Now, if you don't know what those things are, you'll want to explore the render to texture function in 3ds Max. I will eventually make I'm working on a project right now that you can see on my website, pixelscholar.com. I'm building a John Deere wheel loader. I'm working on the high poly version of it right now, and I'm going to also build a low poly version that I'm bringing into Unreal Engine 4 that I'm going to have to use projection on. So once that model is ready to go, what I'll probably end up doing is do a render to texture tutorial as well, so keep an eye out for that. But at any rate, I can come in here and kind of mess around with seeing if I can fit all of these things in here, or if there's anything that I can do to free up some space. One thing I could do potentially here is I could take these little areas right here, and I'm going to turn off select element. Remember, right here, this is across a 45-degree angle, or a 90-degree angle. So we actually want to break that up. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to hit break. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. So grab this guy and hit break. And if I weren't going to do a projection, I could overlap these two guys, but let's pretend that I do want to do some projections. So what I can do is I can mess around with trying to do this as efficiently as possible by lining up the straight edges. Okay, so I could come in here, line these guys up like this, or I could try to be a little creative, and as long as I don't overlap these guys, I could come in and position them so that we have as little lost space in here as humanly possible. The other thing that I can try doing is, since these guys have, excuse me, these rounded and irregular edges, I'm going to come in here and rotate this guy. And boy, wouldn't it be great if I could just fit that right in there? Wouldn't that be fantastic? And again, anywhere that I break this up, I'm going to have to deal with seams. Now, if you're working with projected textures, that's not as big a deal. One thing I could do is I could take this guy, rotate him. There we go. And then I could see about maybe fitting these guys together up in here. Now, one of the complaints I hear with this is people will say, yeah, but this is it's time consuming. Which, yeah, it is. That's why the job doesn't pay minimum wage. It's hard. You actually want it to be a little bit difficult, because the second that they can make it easy enough that a computer can do it, I mean, the computer's already doing so much of the work for us algorithmically already. You still want there to be parts of this that you kind of have to sweat to achieve. We call that job security. All right, so let me move this over here. And besides, what are you doing? Where are you going? Are you that busy that you can't, you know, if you've put all this time and energy into making this awesome model, then you should be willing to put the time in to unwrap it. Excuse me, man. Oh, and one last thing that just occurred to me, I could rotate this guy and move this up here, which gives me this empty space over here. And I want to scale up, so I'm going to take all of these guys right here and put these as close as I can. And you don't want to overlap them, and you still want to have a certain amount of distance. But again, unfortunately, the spacing between your UV islands and stuff, that becomes important later on, but that'll have to be a separate tutorial. And let's come in here, scale these guys up, but make sure that we don't scale it to the point where we can't actually fit everything inside. Because remember, we're trying to be as efficient as possible, because we don't want to waste resources on our own game. And for now, just for the sake of the tutorial and my own sanity here, there we go. I'm going to leave it at that. So we have a nice UV template. Nothing is overlapping. We've minimized the distortion on the geometry. Okay. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save my file, obviously. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. I'm going to come out of subobject mode. So here's my piece of geometry. And I'm going to come up here to File, which is the little Max button, and I'm going to hit Save. So I'm going to save my project. And once you have this applied on UVs, let's come in and turn off the map seams here and take a look. See this little discontinuity right here? That has to do with the two sides meeting at the seam. And really, I should have probably put this at the bottom, or I should have put it around here at the back if this part's going to be against the engine. We tend to, we try to hide the seams, okay? So always keep that in mind. But that's a relatively decent unwrap for now. So once you have this unwrapped, if you need to render out a template, say for example if you're in one of my online classes and that's part of the assignment, what you can do is go back into your UV editor, okay? And I'm going to turn off Show Vertex Connections now. And go up here to Tools, I think it's under Tools, yeah, and hit Render UVW Template. Now inside of this little window, you can set up the width and height, 1024 by 1024, 1K is fine. Down here under Show Overlap, there is no overlap, but if there were, it would render bright red to show you, hey, you've got overlapping geometry here. You can also set this up to fill those areas. So I can come in here under Mode and say, fill this with a solid color. And I can choose to show visible edges or not show visible edges. Let me do a render, and I'll show you what visible edges look like. See, it outlines everything in green. If you don't want that, or I'm sorry, that's seam edges. If you don't want the seam edges, turn it off and hit render UV template again. See? This to me, I think, is a great way to display the UVs because you can still see where all the geometry is. You can still see the wireframe. It's actually possible to turn off the wireframe as well and re-render it so that you don't have the wireframe. But I actually like to see the wireframe, so I'm going to come in here and leave visible edges on. And then you can come up here and hit Save Image, and then save that out as, I don't know, a targa, right? And I'll just call that, what did I call this? I think UVW demo. Unwrap demo, that's what I called it. Unwrap demo. And save it. If you save it as a 32-bit, it'll have an alpha channel on it. Okay, and I just saved that out to the desktop. And once that's done, we can close this all down. We can close down our render windows. How do we actually bake those textures, those UVs, into the actual object? It's easy. Come over here where it says in your modifier stack and right click and choose collapse all. Or you can come out here, select the object, right click it and hit convert to editable poly object. Okay, and if you want, if you're turning this in for an assignment, it's generally a good idea to also do a screenshot. So bring this in, go into a nice perspective viewport, hit Z to zoom out, and give yourself like a nice 45-degree, like a isometric view of it. And you can either render it or you can just do print screen on your keyboard and then bounce into Photoshop. And once you've hit print screen, it stores what's on your screen into memory. So if you want, you can just come up to File, New, and see 1920 by 1080, which is my screen resolution, hit OK, then come up here to Edit and hit Paste. There's my screenshot. Now, the other thing that I can do is I can come in here and crop out all of the surrounding area here. So if I just want the viewport. There we go. And then just hit the little check mark. So there's that. And then I can go to File, Open, and out here on my desktop, I can grab that targa that I rendered. And so now what I'm seeing is I'm seeing the UVs, okay, represented in the template here. And I'm also seeing the texture actually applied to the object. Now, when you make your PDF file to turn in, this is for my students, I would actually include both of these just because it's a good idea to not only show the template, but also show how that template is actually carrying off applying a texture to this surface. Okay? Okay, that's it. I hope this was helpful. And I hope that even if you already knew how to unwrap, that you at least picked up a few tips and tricks here and there. Remember that once you collapse your modifier stack, this is the last thing, the UVs are still on there. And if you ever need to access them again, just reapply your Unwrap UVW. Right? You'll be on map channel 1. We'll talk about multiple unwrap channels in another video. But if I go in here to open UV editor, see, my UVs are still there. You can still get at them. Okay? So if I come in here and collapse all again, see, they don't go away. They just bake down. And I want you to know that because if I were going to bring this into, say, Unreal or Unity or CryEngine, I couldn't actually keep that modifier on there because the modifiers only work inside of 3ds Max. Okay, this wound up being a really long tutorial. Like I said, hope you learned something. Sorry it isn't quite as polished as my other videos, but it's the information that matters. All right, until next time.